Here. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We're happy to have you with us today. My name is Maria Brogan. I am the CEO at the Northeast Association of Realtors, and I have the pleasure of introducing you to today's speaker, John Torvi, who is a really great friend of mine and a wonderful supporter of NEAR. John is the Vice President of Marketing and Sales at the Landy Insurance Agency in Norwood. John has been in the insurance industry, focusing on the needs of business owners for over 30 years. He holds a bachelor's degree from Providence College and a master's degree from Springfield College, and is a frequent speaker and contributor to professional journals and conferences for the real estate, legal, accounting, and insurance industries. Today, he is going to be presenting 10 ways to lose a malpractice claim. So with that, welcome, John, and we're ready to learn how to stay out of trouble.
All right. Well, thanks, Maria. And it's always a pleasure to work with you and everyone with NEAR. It's been a long relationship and a great relationship. So I appreciate the opportunity to be a part of it. So, you know, the other way to look at this is 10 ways not to get involved in the malpractice claim in the first place. So we'll talk about some of these issues and what's getting agents and brokers in trouble. And maybe how to avoid some of those things. You'll see some familiar themes for sure. We welcome your questions, though I think we're going to save them all until the end. So please type them into the Q&A box, and we'll make sure we get to all of your questions at the end. So thanks again. So we do have some objectives here. What do we want to accomplish in the next hour? What most often gets agents and brokers into trouble? You know, what are the big deals for you and all, and how can you prevent those things? And most importantly is to develop tools of defense, because there is no guarantee that you can't or won't be sued. And we'll talk about how insurance can be a part of that risk management and preventative aspect for you as well. So should you worry? Well, if you're in my shoes, you should, yes. Because 1 in 4 real estate agents are going to get sued at some point in their career. And that's a pretty big number. And we see, we insure, you know, tens and tens of thousands of real estate agents, and we have thousands of claims, unfortunately. They all follow very familiar themes, as you'll find out. But there's a good chance that you may be sued. And getting sued is a real pain. It's uncomfortable, it's long, and it's a hassle. The average lawsuit takes a good year or so to resolve. So that's a year of anxiety and hassle and dealing with lawyers and letters and things that can just be, you know, very uncomfortable. A lot of times I hear, well, I represent buyers. My liability is less. Statistics prove otherwise. It's almost split 50-50 and has been for years and years, that the number of claims against sellers reps and buyers reps are almost equal. So it really doesn't matter what you're doing in that sense in terms of transactional work. You're equally likely to get sued no matter who you're representing there. And as I mentioned, you don't have to do anything wrong to get sued. If you get sued, that doesn't mean you're guilty. It just means someone wants you to be guilty and is going to try to make you liable. So you don't have to do anything wrong necessarily in order to receive the hassle and discomfort of that lawyer's letter that comes in the mail looking for redress. And remember that the real estate transaction that you're participating in involves a whole lot of people that you can't control. There's the other agent, there's the appraiser, there's the inspector, there's the lawyers, there's the lender. And any one of those people can be a person who is also alleged to have made an error. And then, of course, we know what happens. Everyone gets sued. So it's not just being in control of your own work, which we want to do, we want you to do, and we'll talk about, but it's also dealing with the uncontrollable, all those other people whose actions you really can't control, and you're at their mercy ultimately. So number one, and this is no surprise to anyone who's ever heard me talk, disclosure. Disclosure is the number one and most massive issue and problem for real estate agents and brokers. Almost all, half of lawsuits nationwide are related to disclosure or non-disclosure issues. Okay, so that's a big number when you think about, well, fair housing and, all of the other things that are potential lawsuit issues. Half of them have to do with disclosure. Now, Massachusetts is a non-disclosure state, so legally you're really not mandated to do a seller's disclosure. We would say absolutely insist that your seller completes a seller's disclosure form. And there's a lot of ways to do that. Maybe that's a topic for another discussion. But the seller's disclosure is so important in order to help reduce not only your liability, but their liability as well. One of the things that's complicating this, again, in Massachusetts and throughout the country is the rise of virtual inspections. A lot of this has to do with COVID, but even pre-COVID, the FHA, for example, and Fannie and Freddie were talking about allowing appraisals to have a virtual inspection component. So it's been exacerbated by COVID, but virtual inspections pose a huge disclosure risk because you're assuming information and control of information that you can't accurately verify. Do we know that 100% of the property has been disclosed and made visual in this supposed inspection? Has the film, the pictures, been enhanced in any way? Are you seeing the roof the way it really looks, or are you seeing a roof that really doesn't exist but has been somehow enhanced for a photograph or MLS listing or even for an appraisal? So there's a considerable risk with the virtual inspections. So some examples of disclosure and non-disclosure, the ones we see all the time, so often. It's kind of crazy how things repeat themselves year after year and state after state. Property defects, absolutely the biggest issue. Things like leaky roofs, wet basements, cracked foundations, things that you may or may not know about, things that the seller may or may not disclose and may or may not know about even themselves. May or may not show up in a virtual inspection, but it doesn't relieve the opportunity for someone to sue you because your seller, and therefore you representing the seller in this case, in a stretch, even representing the buyer, say, well, you didn't tell me that the roof leaks and you didn't put that in your virtual inspection. Some of the things that we see are kind of maddening from our end because they're things that are relatively factual and easy to prove. And I say relatively factual because sometimes there's discrepancies about square footage, below grade square footage and so on and so forth. But we see a lot of disclosure issues around things that can be verified. Square footage, I mentioned, zoning misrepresentations. We see claims about representations or misrepresentations about septic versus sewer and well water versus public water. Those are claims that you can't win because just about any person, including a lay person, is going to be able to figure out if you're connected to the sewer or not. So it's maddening that we see these claims, and just as a point of caution for everyone to not assume the easy stuff. Not assume that the whatever statement or information exists about the property being connected to a public sewer or having public water or any of those things are accurate. Okay, we see enough claims to know that people are misrepresenting that information. We see a lot of claims related to unpermitted additions and improvements, floodplain, deed and property restrictions, and undisclosed liens. One of the most interesting claims we have going is in California, where a very, very well-known celebrity, whose name you would recognize immediately, is prohibited from selling their big Hollywood mansion because there are some endangered plants on the property, which were not disclosed when they bought the property. So you can imagine the size of that lawsuit. So an endangered plant disclosure is holding up a sale of a property worth tens of millions of dollars. So all of these little things come back to bite you. It's really just instructive to do your due diligence on just about everything that you can find out about the property and disclose it. And then there's all the crazy stuff too, that it's hard to, figure out where the law stands and where the courts will stand. Deaths in the home, are there, confirmed child molesters in the neighborhood? And do you disclose those? Do you not disclose those? How do you disclose those things? What are your obligations? It's important to temper your opinion, okay? Typically, we find that when an opinion is given, it is taken as fact, and it becomes very difficult to prove. What you think versus what you know is so critical in terms of how you disclose or not disclose any information. So here's a few things to keep in mind related to disclosure and maybe how to minimize that. Advise the seller in writing to fully disclose all known property defects, and advise that they can be legally liable for misrepresentation as well. We seldom see a lawsuit that involves a seller's rep lack of disclosure that also doesn't involve the seller. Okay, so they're going to be just as liable potentially as their agent. And you'll notice that I wrote in writing, and I wrote that about 25 times during this presentation, because if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. You want to recommend in writing, again, that the buyer obtain a home inspection if it's not already mandated, and have them accept or decline in writing. This is also very important for agents who are selling their own properties, agent-owned properties, and are concerned about whether or not their E&O insurance may cover sales of agent-owned properties. Typically, errors and omissions policy will require that you have in writing that you've suggested both a home warranty and a home inspection to the seller, and they accepted or declined in writing. If that doesn't exist, then it's possible your E&O insurance will not cover you for these agent-owned sales. So there's a lot of reasons for doing these things. State in writing that you can't verify or be responsible for any information or representation provided by a third party. And there's that virtual inspection again, but it could be some other third party as well. Let the buyer do their due diligence, okay? It's their responsibility and not yours to verify whether or not the roof really leaks, or how the foundation may be cracked. And certainly it's not your responsibility, or even within your legal skill levels, for just about everybody listening, I think, that we don't provide opinions on remediation of any of these potential defects in terms of either how it can be fixed or how much it's going to cost to be fixed. If you verified that the roof leaks, or the seller has verified that the roof leaks, or there's some other issue with the property, then it's up to the buyer, and the buyer may work with the other representatives involved, or even with the seller, but it's up to the buyer to determine how bad the roof is, or how bad some other defect is, and obtain the information on the remediation of that. Unless you're a structural engineer, you shouldn't be talking about what it's going to take to fix a cracked foundation or a rotted beam, or any of these things. What it's going to cost to remove an old cesspool in the back part of the property. Let the buyer handle that, because you will be held liable for information that's not only inaccurate, but where you're not licensed to represent that information. Item number 2 here, related to how to lose a claim. And that's not handling your insurance properly and knowing what it entails. So errors and omissions policies are really the ones we're referencing hear the most, though you may have other types of insurance. Errors and omissions policies cover your professional services, what you're ethically and legally required to do as a licensed professional. And they respond when a claim is made against you, not when the incident took place. You may have sold a house 2 or 3 years ago, but you may not be sued until today because the issue that may spark a claim was just discovered today. Okay, it didn't take place. It wasn't discovered at the time of the transaction. So the policy responds when the claim is made, not when the alleged faulty service was provided. And the service in question had to be provided after the policy's retroactive date or prior acts date. So what this really means is that, let's say you bought a policy January 1st, 2010, and you provided a professional service on January 1st, 2018, and you got sued today, okay? So as long as you provided that service after that initial date of January 1st, 2010, you have coverage. So it's really important to maintain a policy, not have it lapse. If a policy lapses, you can lose your prior acts coverage, and everything that you've done, all your services will no longer have any type of insurance protection. And the claim needs to be reported according to the conditions of the policy. Typically a policy will require that you report a claim within the policy period, not the next policy period. And it may require that you report a claim as soon as you become aware of some issue. You don't even have to get a lawyer's letter, but you will need to report the claim as a potential claim if you receive a threatening phone call, email, or anything like that, that indicates that you may become a target for a lawsuit. So how do you do what to do when you become aware of a potential claim or an actual claim? How do you handle it? You treat all threats and demands as real and requiring a serious and legal response. Report it to your insurance carrier. The first thing that your insurance policy will do is provide a lawyer, a defense attorney for you. That's the primary objective and responsibility of the insurance company, is to provide a defense for you. Let the lawyers do their thing, okay? Don't seek remedies on your own. And I know sometimes, you may get a complaint, well, the stove stopped working. You say, okay, I'll just go spend $1,000 and buy a new stove. That's different than, someone saying, you sold me a home and you didn't disclose the proper zoning or the proper square footage. Those are big deal matters and really need to be turned over to your insurance company and let the lawyers handle it again. Don't go on vacation and then report the issue. Report the issue first. Don't let your policy expire and then renew. Here's an example that a real life example where, in fact, a potential notice was given to one of our brokers who tried to remediate the problem on their own, was unable to. The buyer of the home realized that they had an open checkbook on the part of the broker and kept coming up with more and more complaints. Finally, the exasperated broker turned it over to us, but it was a different policy year. So technically, the insurance company could have denied coverage because the claim was not reported during the policy year. Now, we ended up covering that, and a $40,000 initial complaint turned into an $800,000 settlement because the broker tried to handle it on their own before turning it over to the insurance company. You don't want that to happen, okay? If there's an issue, just notify us right away, notify your insurance carrier right away, let them handle it. And don't get all, upset about it. Don't stop posting on Facebook and on LinkedIn about this nasty client. How dare they sue me? I did everything right. Or they're just upset because of this, or is the other broker's fault. Don't do any of that. Okay, don't do any of that. Just lock down your office, assign a designated person who will communicate with the attorneys or any other parties, and otherwise there's no other communication taking place whether within the office, whether at a coffee shop, or on any social media about the claim. So item number 3 about how to lose an E&O claim is that situation where agents are acting outside of the authority of their broker and outside of the authority of their policy procedure manual or whatever restrictions and obligations that the broker imposes upon the agent. Yes, agents are independent contractors, and it's a fine line to walk sometimes, but agents are still, according to law in every state, and certainly in Massachusetts, agents are responsible to their managing brokers, and consequently, the managing brokers are responsible to provide an environment and a set of guidelines to the agents that keep them compliant, not only with their own rules and expectations, but also with what any legal and ethical expectations as well. So your E&O policy has a definition of professional services. Okay, well, let's start there. What are you covered for in that policy? Are you covered for residential and commercial sales, property management, escrow services, and what's the definition of escrow services? First of all, let's start there. Make sure that whatever your firm is doing and everyone who represents what that firm is doing is listed as a covered professional service in the policy. If it's not, either stop doing it or talk to your insurance agent to determine how you can get that coverage. But look at your definition of professional services and make sure it meets the guidelines of what you're actually performing on a daily basis. And here's the kicker, in terms of the agent being in compliance. The policy will have a statement that reads something like this: in order for coverage to apply, the service must be performed with the authority of and on behalf of the named insured. Okay, so if an agent is doing something that doesn't have the explicit approval in writing, I'm surprised I said that right, in writing, that it's okay to do that, then the agent should not be doing it. In fact, they jeopardize not only their own E&O insurance coverage, but the E&O coverage of the firm and the managing broker. So no one wins. There's a lot of unhappy people in that scenario. So if you're a broker, a managing broker, and you don't want your agents to do property management, you don't want them to list certain types of commercial properties, there are geographical restrictions or whatever else you think you want them to do or not to do, it needs to be in writing. And the agent needs to be aware of that and accepting those guidelines. Okay. I get calls all the time from agents. Well, my broker won't let me do property management, but I really want to do it on my own. Can I get E&O coverage for that? Well, whether or not they can may be up to the individual insurance company. Whether or not it's legal for them to do that is typically not legal, because in almost all states, and I think all states, an agent needs to hang their shingle under a managing broker. And they're not allowed to provide real estate services, licensed real estate services, outside of the approval and under the auspices of a managing broker. So I typically tell agents, no, you need to go talk to your broker about this. And if they say you can't do property management or whatever the requested service is, then don't do it or go find another broker. Okay. So it does need to be something that's very clear, because we have seen scenarios where coverage has been declined because the agent was not acting within the authority of the managing broker. And by the way, both the insurance company and the managing broker can decline to cover the agent. So if an agent does something, goes rogue, there's a claim that results, the broker owner, the named insured, can say, hey, I want you, ABC insurance company, to cover me, but don't cover my agent because they didn't act within my authority. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong here, a lot of risk. Make sure that the expectations of everyone acting on behalf of that firm are are clearly stated. Again, otherwise, potentially no coverage. So how do you manage independence? I think we have a webinar coming up in May regarding policy and procedure manuals, but let's start there that you need one. And hopefully everyone has one, and that it's sufficient to cover just a whole number of different issues that may not pop up in the independent contractor agreements that everyone has to otherwise sign. A policy and procedure manual is something that's very separate from that and can get into a lot of minutia, but very important minutia. Minutia is only minutia until it becomes an issue. Then it's a big deal. There's no issue too small to think about covering, again, including allowable professional services and consequences for non-compliance. You can't randomly issue discipline without facing your own, consequences of potentially improper employment practices and so on. So consequences for any type of improper behavior also need to be listed in that procedure manual and meted out on an even and fair basis amongst all independent contractors and or employees. You want to take, again, another look at that insurance policy to make sure that the services are being provided. You'll see that in the policy. You'll see it on the declarations page of your policy, and you'll see it in the exclusions of that policy also. Again, what's covered is commercial property management covered. A lot of times it's not, at least initially. Our escrow service is covered. A lot of times they're not covered initially. So you want to be concerned and aware of all of those issues. What about if there is a lawsuit against the firm and against an agent, and your firm has a $5,000 deductible? Who pays that? Okay. Is it the sole responsibility of the firm? Is it the sole responsibility of the agent? Or is there some shared responsibility? Well, it really doesn't matter in the sense of how an agent may choose, how a broker, may choose to make an agent responsible for whether it's deductibles or any other types of expenses. But if it's not in writing, then you're going to be having a confrontation at the same time you're receiving a letter from a lawyer asking you for $100,000. So the share of the deductible needs to be explicitly stated in the procedure manual as well. You don't want to have that discussion when there's a claim. And as I mentioned, an agent should not have their own E&O policy. They may be able to obtain it, but that doesn't mean that they should. And there's a whole bunch of other legal complications and implications from having two insurance policies. So it really goes back to zeroing in on, okay, this is what my firm does. John's Real Estate LLC provides these professional services. My agents are allowed via this agreement in writing to do these professional services, and that's it. If you have a claim, you'll be responsible for 50% of the deductible, so on and so forth. That's the way to solve this problem and not lose that E&O claim, as we're trying not to do here. A lot of times we see firms and professionals receive subpoenas. Could be a subpoena because there's a complaint against the appraiser or the home inspector or the other agent or whatever the issue might be, the buyer, the seller. And you may receive a subpoena and say, hey, they're not looking at me. They just want some information from me. Okay, they want my files, they want my records, they want a written statement. Okay, should you provide that just because you receive a request? No, absolutely not. Okay, a subpoena is a legal document. It requires a legal response. And again, unless there's an attorney in your firm or you are an attorney, and I'm not an attorney, so I'm going to include myself in the statement. None of us are qualified to respond to a subpoena. Okay, subpoenas become fishing expeditions. Okay, because once the plaintiff, the complainant receives your file, guess what they're going to do? They're going to start digging through it, looking for things that you allegedly did wrong, and now you'll be the subject of a potential lawsuit as well. So don't release any information without consulting with a lawyer. And your E&O policy will hopefully provide a subpoena response coverage. Almost all of them do. I won't say that universally, but just about all of them do. They may give you $5,000 for a subpoena response, $2,500, $10,000. It doesn't matter. Typically, there's enough coverage there with no deductible, so you don't have to worry about taking money out of your pocket, for the insurance company to provide an attorney to you to respond to the subpoena. And that attorney, your representation, will tell you what to do and what documents to release and not release. Okay, you can't ignore it. It's not going to go away. Again, it is a legal document requiring a legal response from you. So if you do receive a subpoena, as benign as it may seem to you at the time, contact your insurance company. It's not a claim. It won't be held against you. Let them assist you with a subpoena response. If you don't, and we see this all the time, it gets blown up into a big issue that in fact then does become a lawsuit type of issue. So here's another issue that can help you lose and or win a potential claim or allegation against your firm, and that is a data breach. You've heard me talk about cybercrime. You're probably sick of hearing about it. It's not going away. But in Massachusetts, your business is required to have what is called a WISP, a Written Information Security Plan. This is Massachusetts law 93H CMR 17.00, all really cool stuff. You can look it up on the internet. It's one of the few things on the internet that's actually true. So take a look at that. And I'm sure all of your businesses have WISPs, right? So not having one, not keeping it current, not following its procedures is a guaranteed way to lose any claim or action against you resulting from a data or security breach. Conversely, having a WISP that is up to date, reviewed annually with your team, and in fact followed whatever procedures you put in your WISP, you in fact actually follow, will help you to defend yourself against allegations of a security breach, whether it's the result of a lawsuit or if the Attorney General comes after you, or some of the other consequences that could be the result of a security breach. It's expensive to have a security breach. The state can also fine you on a per record basis. So they don't fine you just because you had a breach. They fine you because you had a breach and 500 records were compromised. So in theory, and actually according to the letter of law, you can be fined 500 times. The Attorney General is not likely to do that, but that doesn't mean it's not going to cost you any potential money and damages otherwise. The things that are other negative consequences of security breaches can include credit card monitoring, notification costs, which are also, again, required to be listed in your WISP and a part of this Mass General Law 93H. So all of these things are required. It's not just an insurance guy telling you should have this stuff and be worried about it. This is in fact codified in Massachusetts law. So here's a few tips. Review your plan annually with all your team members. Make sure you know where it is. Don't stick it in a drawer and forget about it, or at least don't forget about it 2 years in a row. Just at least annually take a look at it. Require encryption on all company-used devices. Use your policy and procedure manual to define the expectations around cyber involvement, agents' email addresses, agents' use of websites, encryption and passwords, and so on. All of those things need to be included in your policy and procedure manual, and update it and review it regularly. And consider cybercrime insurance. Excuse me for a moment. Consider cybercrime insurance, and I know we're not talking about advertising here and certainly not plugging anything But it's something you really have to consider in this day and age. I apologize. I'm losing my voice here. So everywhere I go, I'm going to step away for a moment and get myself a glass of water, and you may want to do the same. Thank you. Okay. Now I'm back on. My apologies for that. So we were talking about the hot market, okay, which is probably one of the bigger deals you're dealing with right now. Really good for a lot of people, really bad for a lot of people, depending upon what side of the fence you're on. But it's a reality and kind of a phenomenon that is affecting everything you do. And there's a lot of traps here for not only buyers and sellers, but certainly for agents representing the buyers and sellers. Okay. And they include, does the buyer still qualify for the mortgage? Okay. Is the bidding capped by contract for any potential buyer? What about disclosure of potential PMI? If the mortgage value changes or the down payment ratio changes, does the property still appraise? Okay. Are there appearances of self-dealing? Yeah, you should bid more. Yes, the house is worth it. Bid, pay, buy, right? Are there other incentives? Cash buyers are skewing the market? Well, we know they are. What about other incentives? We see claims related to incentives, almost baiting, where you have videos, baked cookies. I mean, it's crazy the stuff we see. I know I say that all the time, but it really is. Are there incentives being laid out either by the agent or by the typically the seller's agent or by the seller themselves that really, are on the edge of breaching professionalism and ethical behavior? Okay. And will the seller in the first case accept an escalation clause, which should address all these other things: caps on bidding, mortgage qualifications, appraisals, and so on and so forth. But the number of claims that we're seeing related to escalating values and bidding wars is increasing almost on a daily basis, especially in the hot markets, and certainly the greater Boston area is one of them. And it's a very difficult situation because, frankly, a lot of agents have not experienced this type of environment beforehand. So it's very, very important to be clear with your seller as well with the buyer around any issues related to mortgage approval, appraisal approval, potential PMI, and all of these things. An escalation clause is really something that can have a tremendous amount of legal significance and should be drafted by an attorney. I think that some of the realtor associations have them as templates, which is great. That doesn't mean you shouldn't vet it. Have an attorney vet it for you as well. So use the caution that's necessary here. Advise the buyer that they're really reducing their negotiating power by engaging in a bidding war and any potential restrictions around that. Can they afford it? Will they still get the loan? If you're involved in a dual agency situation, um, bidding wars will be disastrous for you because there's no way you can prove that you were acting in the best interest of the buyer or the seller if you're representing both of them. So if you're in a dual agency, a potential dual agency, and it's the kind of property that may see escalated bidding, get away from it. Have someone else in your firm represent either the buyer or seller. Definitely take an arm's length approach because that's a claim you'll never win. And there needs to be real clarification that the seller and the seller's agent need to state how and when bids will be accepted. Are they accepted immediately? Are we responding to all bids Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock? Whatever the framework might be for that, that needs to be stated again in writing. So there's again a clear expectation that all bids are being treated equally and fairly. There's no backroom dealing. There's no self-dealing involved. We know that sometimes the escalation clauses can be something that will also delay the sale of a property, and the seller's agent can appear to be self-dealing if they say, no, don't accept that offer, you'll get more, when maybe the seller needs to close really quickly because whatever the reason, personal reasons, they got a job transfer, it's an estate sale, whatever it is. So you have to be really careful not to encourage the seller to participate in a bidding escalation type of scenario if that's really not what they want to do. And again, always check for legitimacy of offers. There is a lot of self-dealing. There's a lot of false offers that are being made where the attempt is just really to drive the price of the property. So you have to be careful where and how those offers are coming from. So we'll get back to my favorite subject, insurance, for a couple of minutes here. So you have insurance. You write that big check every year to your insurance company, and I know you do that with a smile on your face and gladness in your heart. So what are you really getting for that check that you're writing and that insurance policy that you're obtaining? Okay, not all E&O policies are created equal. Don't assume that they are. If you're buying one versus another strictly because you're saving, X number of dollars and have no idea what your coverage is, I hate to say you deserve what you get, but you got to be careful because, as I mentioned earlier, minutia is only minutia until it's staring you in the face in the form of a lawyer's letter. So some of the things that you want to pay attention to, especially in this market, and I think especially as we move away from eviction moratoriums, and I think we're going to see a lot of foreclosures, and I think the environment will change in the next several months. Take a look at what you're actually covered for. I mentioned professional services earlier. Are you covered for property management, residential property management, commercial? Are you covered for agent-owned properties? So, all of those things. But what about some of these other things that we see? You have, hopefully, fair housing coverage, fair housing and discrimination coverage. Could be a really big deal if you're involved in eviction, short sales, foreclosures, property management, especially. Do you have $50,000 of fair housing coverage, or do you have $500,000 or some number in between? Just because you have fair housing coverage doesn't mean that you have enough. Fair housing coverage for claims, for example, tend to be very large. So if your policy only has $50,000, you may say, well, that's probably not enough coverage there. I mentioned the definition of professional services. Do you have support? Is there a legal hotline you can call? Can you talk to a lawyer if you need them? Who can you count on to reach? I get so many calls with different scenarios, And actually, I was helping a broker last week or a couple of weeks ago with escalation clause waivers and helping with some of the language there. And I ultimately referred them to our legal hotline where one of the lawyers could step in. So is that assistance there for you? You're not going to be a real estate broker or agent forever. Okay, at some point you may retire. You may sell your business. Your form of ownership may change where you no longer have partners or you're taking on partners. Terrible things might happen, death and disability and so on. What happens to your liability should any of these things take place? It doesn't go away. Even if you die, your liability doesn't go away, and the liability of your corporation doesn't go away. So how are you protected? How is your corporation protected? How is your spouse or domestic partner protected? How is your estate protected should any of these things happen? Well, your insurance policy will tell you. And there's some really great coverage there for these things and some policies, and there's some really lousy options as well. But at some point, recognize that you're not going to be in business any longer. And you'll want to know what protection your insurance policy will provide for you and what options there are to protect your family, your estate, surviving business partners, and so on and so forth. Does your E&O policy cover you for open house bodily injury coverage, for example? You may have what's called a business owner's package or an office general liability policy, and you may think, well, this covers my slip and fall and property damage liabilities. Most of those policies exclude coverage for open houses. They may provide coverage for you if you're doing a showing, but they exclude open houses. So you may want to take a look at your E&O policy and see if the bodily injury and property damage coverage is there for the open houses as well. And then there's another 30 or 35 pages here that you may want to see what's actually on that policy. And hang on a second, my Wi-Fi is about to time out on me. Don't want to do that. Okay. So do the unpleasant and boring thing and read your insurance policy, and then call your insurance agent and say, what does this mean? What does that mean? That's what you're paying them for. Surprisingly so, you are paying them for that, right? So check your sublimits, check your definition of professional services, and everything else we just covered here. I think we have a duplicate slide, so I apologize for that. A couple of minutes ago, I mentioned property management. Property management is, without a doubt, the riskiest, from a liability perspective, the riskiest professional service that you can do and you can provide. And I think there's a lot of obvious reasons for that. You're required to maintain a property. Hopefully you have clear guidelines, expectations, and a budget to do that. But there's a lot of traps here. People get injured on the property. Guests get injured on the property. The property is damaged. The owner says it's not maintained properly. Fail to live up to your contract. There could be rent disputes, eviction issues. We've had people die and blame the property manager, because you got to sue somebody, right? So property management is by far the riskiest professional service you can undertake as a broker or agent, and should be considered very carefully. I know even a lot of the franchises don't permit property management or require special approval. So even before you want to take that, if you're a franchise broker, you may need to check with the franchisor to see if you can do it in the first place. It just really requires a different level of supervision and expertise that, frankly, the average agent doesn't have. And that's not a dig. I mean, it's just a new thing to learn. It's just a different thing you have to learn about. Fair housing and discrimination, these cash for keys issues are big. They lead to big lawsuits. And again, E&O policies and even your general liability policies may not provide any coverage or very limited coverage for property management. It can be lucrative. It's an expensive thing to insure, but if you're making money, that's fine. Just do it the right way, right? Make sure you have the insurance there to help you with it. It's a greater cost of doing business. All of the things we mentioned here are just so relevant. And if you're thinking about doing it, talk to your insurance agent, talk to a lawyer, get your ducks in line before you engage in any type of property management. And by the way, most insurance policies define property management, and I think it's legally defined too, as the responsibility to physically maintain a property. It's not acting as a rental or leasing agent. So sometimes I get that question, and there's certainly a distinction there. So here's one that we see a lot, and especially we see these types of issues when there's downturns in economic climates, and we see foreclosures, and we see evictions, and short sales, and so on. This was a huge issue 10 or 12 years ago. I'm hoping it doesn't repeat itself. But you're a realtor, you're not a lawyer, okay? We're people person. I'm a salesperson. You're salespeople. What's our job? Our job is to be nice to people. Our job is to make them happy and to get them to agree with us, and for us to agree with them. And we meet somewhere in the middle, and they buy something, and we get paid. And we want to do that where everyone walks away happily. Well, there's a risk in that, because as people pleasers, we can extend our authorities, and we can extend our abilities and even our licensing authorities in order to please people. So these are claims that we see, and you can avoid them by being careful of what you say. We see unauthorized practice of law claims, okay, where an agent is being accused of providing legal advice, okay. There's a fine line there to help someone with an eviction issue, with interpreting contracts, and so on and so forth. Earlier we talked about escalation clauses in contracts and so on. It's a fine line, but if you cross it, it's one of those lawsuits that you will lose. So issues around evictions, contracts, representations that you may make, and certainly any types of threats or ultimatums implying consequences for action or inaction, that can absolutely be considered the unauthorized practice of law. It's a fine line, but sometimes it's better not to say anything. And as we talked about earlier, in terms of referring questions and issues to an expert around a structural issue, or construction or repair or anything else like that, this is also where you say, I'm sorry, I'm not a lawyer, and as you'll see in our next bullet point, I'm not a tax accountant or CPA. I'm not authorized to give you tax or legal advice. I do that. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I still preference a lot of conversations by saying, I cannot give you legal or tax advice. Now, does that stuck in my throat sometimes because I think I know everything because I've been doing this for so long? Yes, it does. But on the other hand, I don't want to get sued for it either. So you have to bite the bullet and recognize your limitations. Tax advice is one we see, and I think is going to pop up its head soon when we talk about how to handle foreclosures, what you can write off, what somebody might be owed, so on and so forth. Any tax credits around historical properties, deed restrictions, any tax benefits for elderly homeowners and handicapped individuals. These are all things that you may know anecdotally, but it doesn't give any of us the right to formally state that, yes, you're going to receive a tax deduction because it's a historical property, or gee, in this town, if you're 62 or older, you're going to get a property tax reduction. You may know that to be true. Doesn't mean you can necessarily say it. It's one of those things that you may say, I really recommend you contact town hall, have your attorney look into this, have your tax expert look into this, because even some things that we know to be true, it doesn't mean that we can, say them on a professional basis. Again, people pleasers, yes, that's what we are. We want to make the sale. We want to make people happy. We really need to know what our boundaries are around that. And worst case scenario, besides being sued, you can also be subject to a criminal suit or a civic suit on a lawsuit. You could also be subject to a criminal suit for misrepresenting yourself as an attorney or a tax representative. Bad stuff can happen here. So you've done everything right. Prove it. How many times have I said get it in writing? Okay, prove it. You get a lawyer's letter today, God forbid. After your righteous indignation, you're going to have to do something, okay? And you're going to call your insurance company. Insurance company is going to tell you what to do, and they're going to assign a defense attorney for you. And the first thing your defense attorney is going to say is, give me your file, give me your documentation. Let me know what you did right. Or in some cases, let me know what you didn't do. But if you don't have that information for your defense attorney, you're up the proverbial creek, because how can they defend you? So do everything you can to protect yourself and document what you did. Remember that it's the plaintiff's attorney's job to prove that you're wrong, that you created an error, okay, and you're liable, monetarily liable, legally liable for what you did. They're going to try to prove that to you. That's their job, okay? How are you going to prove them otherwise? Okay, give your attorney the defense and tools that they need to do that. The buyer doesn't want a home warranty, fine, put it in writing, okay, put it in your file. Did you get a text from somebody at 1 o'clock in the morning about this or that? Great, put it in an email form as soon as you get to work in the office the next day and say, I received your text that states this, this, and this, and I'm acknowledging receipt of your text. Okay, put it in writing. Have a conversation, especially if it's a little bit of a shaky conversation. Write back to the person you had the conversation with. As per our phone call at 10 a.m. this morning, it's my understanding that you said this, this, and this, or you want me to do this, this, and this. Again, put it all in writing. I want you to assume something right from the beginning for everything that you do. Assume that you're going to get sued. Okay, we talked about 1 in 4 agents being sued in their career. Just assume that you're going to get sued, that somebody's going to come in and tear your work apart and look for something that you did wrong. Okay, if you operate on that, every contract you sign, every statement that you make, every recommendation that you make, and so on, that somebody is going to be pulling that apart and tearing it apart to see where you were wrong, you will substantially reduce the actual chances of being sued in the first place. So that's me. I hope this was helpful. I think that the real key takeaways here, just, be careful what you say and what you do. Stay within your lane. And again, that's not meant to be any type of criticizing or derogatory statement. We all have our lanes. We're not lawyers, we're not tax representatives, maybe we're not property managers. We all have a job to do, which hopefully we're very good at, and I know you are. But recognize what that is. Do that. Document everything that you do. Expect to be sued. Hopefully you won't be, but expect to be sued. And use the resources that you have to create an environment that enhances success for you financially and otherwise, but also reduces the risk. That policy and procedure manual that we talked about, clear communication between broker and agent, and managing your client expectations as well. Maybe my last risk management tip here is that not all clients are good clients. You don't need to take on a client just because they called you, whether they found you via an advertisement, even a referral. Vet that client, because what are their motives? What do they really want you to do for them? Okay. and that will help you as well. So thank you. I know we have a few questions here, Brandis. I don't know if you want to ask them, and I'll try to answer them.
Sure, I can. Linda asked one earlier, but then right after she asked it, you switched the slide and answered her. So I'm not going to read that one.
Okay.
It's like you knew she's going to ask. But Audrey asked, what is the statute of limitations in which a client/customer can bring a lawsuit forward?
Yes, that's a great question. And I see the question, Audrey, and you mentioned a couple of options: a date of sale, question mark, when discovered, question mark. Yes, and more. The statute of limitations is a floating target. You'd like it to be a real thing that you can put in concrete. First of all, the allegation against you may have different statute of limitations. The state where the allegation is being brought against you could have different statute of limitations. And then, as you really mentioned here, when discovered, the statute of limitations in some cases can start when you provided the service. Okay, so it could be 3 years ago today. In some cases, the statute of limitations can begin when the issue was discovered. Okay, which could be today, not 3 years ago today, it could be today. How do we know how that works? Well, it's one of those things when the plaintiff attorney brings suit against you, and your defense attorney says, well, this is beyond the statute of limitations. And then the plaintiff attorney says, oh yeah, we'll prove it. It's maddening, okay? Assume that unless you're an appraiser, for example, following USPAP guidelines, tax attorney following other IRS guidelines in terms of file maintenance and so on, that there is no statute of limitations. I think that's really the only way to do that. You can keep files for 5 years. I think it's safer 7 years, and properly dispose of them. And I think you will have strong legal justification for doing that. But will that necessarily protect you against a statute of limitations issue? No, it won't, because again, statute of limitations is really only something that exists when two lawyers, an arbitrator and or the court, agree what that statute of limitations date is.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, not so awesome, I guess, but
it's not awesome, but the answer was very expansive, which was awesome.
Yeah. All right.
I don't know that the situation is awesome, but
okay.
The only other question we had in the Q&A was not really a question, it was just more of a statement. But if you want to speak to it, she just said, lately in this heated seller's market, many agents do not have the seller complete a seller's statement. That's all she said.
Well, I think if you're representing the seller, you need to let them know that they can be held liable for any conditions of the property or the sale that may cause harm to the buyer. Okay. Again, Massachusetts is a non-disclosure state, but that doesn't mean that the seller or the seller's agent is free from liability. Even with as-is properties, there's still legal precedent that says you have to disclose. Okay. And if the seller absolutely refuses to provide any disclosure statement, I think it's the seller's agent's responsibility and obligation to let the buyer's agent know that the seller is refusing to provide any information on the property. As a buyer's agent, you need to recommend to your potential buyer that they should request a seller's disclosure. If the seller still refuses, then the buyer needs to either accept or decline that in writing. Okay. And you really have to look at beyond that. I mean, what are the motivations here for somebody, whether a buyer or seller, to proceed with a transaction involving hundreds of thousands of dollars or more without knowing what they're buying? What are the motivations here? Okay. is the property a real rehab, property, and the buyer is a construction redevelopment company, that really doesn't care whether or not the roof leaks because they're gonna, or is it, a young family who says, I don't know anything about buying houses. I guess we like this house. We like the backyard. I know where the swing set's going. So, we're gonna buy this house. So what are the motivations of the buyer and the seller? But you have to be very, very cautious, because unless you recommend and have everybody sign off yes or no on these things, you're going to be liable, for what can happen.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was a great answer. That was all of our questions. We don't have
Okay.
any more, unless anybody has one real quick right now, but no one's chiming in. So I think
Linda said most attorneys in Mass are advising the sellers not to fill out a seller's statement. So what happens then, John? If we have our members saying, yes, fill it out, but the attorney is advising them not to.
I don't know. Is the attorney going to be liable? I mean, on what basis do they state this? Just because an attorney advised, and I wonder what that attorney is. I mean, who are they? Apparently they're representing the seller, but in what capacity? I need to know that, maybe to better answer the question. Linda wrote self-incrimination. Remember that you can get sued for anything, or allegedly anything, okay? And if an attorney says, no, you don't have to complete a seller's disclosure, and you still get sued for that proverbial leaky roof, which I use an example probably too much because there's so many other property issues that can go wrong. I mentioned, endangered flowers that are restricting the home sale. Just because the attorney advised you, based on what grounds did they advise you, you can still get sued. If you get sued, you still need a defense, and you still need to defend yourself. So there's a cost involved as well as a process. And I can guarantee you that attorney is not going to rush to your defense and say, well, gee, I told you to do this. I'm now going to provide a free legal defense for you. That's not going to happen. So any advice like that, I really think you have to take with a grain of salt, and again, see where the motivation is coming from. When half of every lawsuit against a real estate agent or broker relates to property condition, you really have to look and see why someone's recommending that you don't talk about that. Just my view on that, but it's it's based on thousands of claims that we see every year on these issues.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, now nothing else actually popped up this time. I didn't even see Linda's pop up, so thank you for catching that, Maria. I appreciate that. I think we're actually good now. I haven't seen anything pop up, and I'm going to say it one more time. Okay, we're good. Okay, no one's asking any more questions, so we are good to go. And thank you, John, for taking the time and hanging out with us, and probably scaring some people a little bit and giving us some great information. And I appreciate it. And we're good to go. So bye.
Right, well, thanks so much, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Feel free to reach out for me. Any questions, you don't have to be one of our clients. Happy to help out any near member. So you all take care and have a great day.
And don't forget to join us with John again on May 5th for manuals and margaritas, DIY at home, my friends.
All right.
And maybe that'll help us get through another session if anybody's scared.
All right. Thanks so much.